The G7 summit in La Malbaie may be over, but that doesn't erase the fact that the organization remains one in search of a mission. This drift has been exacerbated by the trade frictions that have come to a boil recently, pitting the United States against the other 6 members of the G7. Yet the G7 can and should play a pivotal role in the world order. Given the deadlock at the UN Security Council occasioned by vetoes exercised by Russia and China, the G7 is the premier venue assembling the leadership of those wealthy nations that carry the burden of leadership in protecting the liberal, rules-based international order on which Canadian and world prosperity and freedom depend. A dysfunctional G7, riven by internal disputes, is of no value to anyone except those who benefit from the undefended world order, like those same veto-wielding countries at the UN. Repairing the G7 requires common projects all members can get behind. Here's a modest proposal for one such common project Ottawa can and should push within the G7. It would have the added benefit of putting America in Canada's debt at a time when Ottawa needs all the relationship capital it can muster in Washington. The project is responding to China's repeated challenges to the international order, challenges that threaten the rule of law, freedom of the seas, and a rules-based international order is an area where there is growing consensus for action. Consider that China has unilaterally commandeered, expanded, and militarized a number of islets, atolls, and reefs in the South China Sea as part of their campaign to claim Chinese sovereignty over these waters. This they have done in the face of condemnation from many of the littoral nations in the region who have unresolved claims to that area, as well as the opposition of the United States and Japan. Chinese President Xi promised, in the White House Rose Garden no less, that China would not militarize these newly constructed islands. Yet in keeping with China's strategy in so many areas, their approach has been to deny, and deny again their intentions while moving ahead in incremental steps until the facts on the ground are overwhelmingly established. Each step along the way is carefully calibrated to be just below the threshold that might trigger international action. Each subsequent step is then too easily allowed to slide on the ground that no one acted on the earlier provocations, and this time the provocation is no worse than the last one. This so-called salami slicing strategy has paid major dividends for China. In the South China Sea, China knows that its bullying tactics wouldn't pass muster when judged against international law, so it insists that any disputes be dealt with bilaterally. The Philippines, however, courageously took China to the International Court of Arbitration to challenge its occupying of islets and reefs over which the Philippines also claimed sovereignty. The International Court of Arbitration unambiguously found in the Philippines' favor and found China's behavior an egregious violation of international law. The fact that China subsequently bullied and bribed the Philippines not to carry the case further can be no excuse for accepting the status quo with those nations who prize the rule of law and the rules-based international order. The Americans, the great defenders of freedom of navigation, and therefore the international trading system it undergirds, have been regularly sending ships through the South China Sea, and particularly into those waters near China's unilaterally commandeered and militarized islets, to China's great displeasure. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, just recently a French warship was dispatched by President Emmanuel Macron on a similar freedom of the seas mission. That warship, carrying a British helicopter detachment and European observers, including from Germany, sailed close to the Chinese-seized Spratly Islands. In one memorable confrontation, the French ship was radioed by the Chinese, who baldly asserted that the islands were under Chinese sovereignty and asking the French to declare their intentions. The French, with all the aplomb of a Paris waiter looking down his nose at a hapless customer, responded that they were in international waters and the Chinese were not in a position to ask anything. When questioned about the mission, the French defense minister asserted that the Chinese fait accompli is not a fait accepté. France has been carrying out such missions in support of freedom of the seas for several years. The Japanese, long concerned about the dangers to their shipping from Chinese assertions of sovereignty over the South China Sea, have been anxiously looking for support on this issue from their allies. Canada sailed one frigate through the South China Sea last year and avoided going close enough to the disputed islands to trigger a Chinese response. This year, sadly, Canada has made it official that they're not doing official freedom of navigation missions defined as going within 12 nautical miles of the disputed islands. That's not enough. America and Japan are looking for allies in their contesting of Chinese aggression. The French and the British are on board, and the Germans observing. This is an issue ripe for some leadership, and who can better put it on the agenda of the G7 than the Prime Minister of Canada? A G7 united in defense of the rule of law, freedom of the seas, and a rules-based international order, and against Chinese assaults on all three, would give the organization a new lease of life and benefit the world.